Have you ever walked into a room full of people and immediately felt like you missed some kind of secret meeting where everyone else learned how to be human? Like they're all speaking the same invisible language and you're just nodding along, pretending you understand the jokes, the rules, the rhythm of it all. Maybe it's at a party, or a family gathering, or even at work. On the outside, you look fine. You're smiling, you're participating. But inside, there's this quiet thought: why do I feel like I don't belong anywhere? Most people assume that feeling out of place means you're shy, or socially awkward, or that you just haven't found your people yet. And sometimes that's true. But psychologically, the experience of feeling out of place everywhere goes much deeper than personality or social skills. It's not just about fitting in. It's about how your brain learned to see the world, how it learned to see itself, and how it learned to interpret connection. Let me show you something interesting. Imagine your mind as a kind of internal radar system. For most people, that radar scans for familiarity. It looks for signs that say, this is safe. This is normal. You belong here. But for some people, that radar is tuned differently. Instead of scanning for similarity, it scans for difference. It's constantly picking up on what's off, what doesn't match, what feels slightly misaligned. So even in a room where you technically fit in, your brain is already whispering, something's not right. You're not quite one of them. And here's the strange part. Often, people who feel out of place everywhere are actually very perceptive. Their brains are highly sensitive to social nuance. They notice micro-expressions, shifts in tone, subtle group dynamics that most people completely ignore. It's like being emotionally high definition in a low-resolution world. You see too much. You feel too much. And that extra awareness makes it harder to relax into belonging. There's a concept in psychology called self-concept, which is basically the story you carry about who you are. Not who you say you are on a form, but who you feel you are, deep down. For people who feel out of place everywhere, that self-concept is often built around the idea of being different, separate, or slightly detached from others. Sometimes this starts very early in life. Maybe you were the kid who didn't quite match your family emotionally. Or the one who matured faster. Or slower. Or just cared about things no one else seemed to care about. Over time, your brain learns a pattern: I am not quite aligned with the world. So even when the world changes, even when you walk into new environments, new friendships, new opportunities, your brain brings that same internal map with it. It's like moving to a new city but keeping the old GPS. No matter where you go, the system keeps saying, recalculating, you still don't belong here. Neuroscience actually supports this. Our brains are prediction machines. They don't just react to reality, they predict it. If your past taught you that connection feels uncertain, awkward, or conditional, your brain starts predicting disconnection everywhere. You walk into a room already expecting to feel out of place, and then your attention filters reality to confirm that expectation. You notice the one person who ignores you, not the three who smile. You remember the awkward pause, not the smooth conversation. Your mind becomes a highlight reel of subtle rejection. It's not that people are actually excluding you more than anyone else. It's that your brain is trained to look for evidence that you don't belong. And here's where it gets more philosophical. Feeling out of place everywhere is often a sign of a very strong inner world. You think deeply. You reflect a lot. You analyze yourself, others, life, meaning, identity. You're not just being in the moment, you're observing yourself being. It's like living with a narrator in your head at all times. While other people are dancing at the party, you're watching yourself dance and wondering what it says about your personality. That self-awareness can be a gift. But it can also create a sense of existential distance. You don't just exist in situations, you stand slightly outside of them, mentally. You're always one step removed, one layer deeper. And that distance can feel like alienation, even when you're surrounded by people. There's a beautiful metaphor for this in psychology: the difference between participant consciousness and observer consciousness. Most people spend a lot of time in participant mode. They're inside experiences, immersed in them. But people who feel out of place often live in observer mode. They're watching life instead of fully inhabiting it. They're studying the room instead of dissolving into it. So you might think the problem is that you don't belong. But psychologically, it's often that you're too busy observing to feel like you belong. Another layer to this is emotional attunement. Some people grew up having to adapt themselves to others emotionally. Maybe you were the peacekeeper. The one who adjusted your personality depending on who you were with. The one who learned to read the emotional weather of the room before expressing yourself. Over time, you become very good at blending in. But you lose touch with what feels authentic to you. So now, no matter where you go, you're performing subtle emotional adjustments. You're mirroring energy, matching tone, fitting shapes. And because you're constantly adapting, you never feel fully rooted in any version of yourself. You fit everywhere a little, but nowhere deeply. You belong in fragments, not in full. This is why people who feel out of place everywhere often hear things like, "You're so easy to talk to," or "You're very understanding," or "You adapt well." But internally, it feels like, "No one really knows me." Because the version of you they meet is always context dependent. There's also something called identity diffusion, a term from developmental psychology. It describes a state where your sense of self feels flexible, fluid, or unclear. Not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, background way. You don't feel anchored to one solid identity. You can imagine yourself in many different lives, many different roles. And while that makes you imaginative and empathetic, it can also make you feel unlocated in reality. Like you're always visiting, never arriving. And culturally, this feeling is becoming more common. We live in a world where we're exposed to thousands of identities, lifestyles, belief systems, and ways of being. Your brain is constantly comparing, should I be like this? Or that? Or something else? The more options you see, the harder it is to feel settled in one place psychologically. Belonging used to be geographical and social. Now it's existential. So if you feel out of place everywhere, it doesn't necessarily mean you're broken. It often means you're highly reflective in a world that rewards unconscious participation. You're sensitive in a culture that prizes performance. You're complex in environments that favor simplicity. The irony is that the very traits that make you feel out of place are often the ones that make you deeply interesting. Your mind doesn't easily collapse into group identity. You don't automatically absorb the dominant narrative. You question, you analyze, you sense the emotional undercurrents others swim past. You're not just living life, you're trying to understand it. And that creates a strange kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being internally different. Of feeling like your inner landscape doesn't quite match the outer world. But here's the perspective shift that changes everything. Belonging isn't always about fitting into places. Sometimes it's about learning to inhabit yourself more fully. When you stop scanning every environment for proof that you don't belong, and start asking, "Am I actually present in my own experience right now?" something shifts. You realize that a big part of feeling out of place comes from being mentally elsewhere, watching yourself from a distance. When you soften that observer mode, even slightly, when you let yourself be imperfectly present, imperfectly human, imperfectly unfiltered, the world feels less alien. Not because it changed, but because you stopped standing outside of yourself. You don't need to belong everywhere. No one truly does. Even the people who look like they fit in perfectly are often performing a version of themselves they think is acceptable. The difference is, they're not narrating it in their heads. So maybe the real question isn't, why do I feel out of place everywhere? Maybe it's, why do I expect to feel perfectly placed in a world that's constantly shifting, ambiguous, and complex? Feeling out of place can be a sign that you're conscious in an unconscious world. That you're reflective in a reactive culture. That you're trying to live deliberately in a system designed for autopilot. And instead of seeing that as a flaw, you can start seeing it as a kind of quiet intelligence. A sensitivity to context. A depth of perception. A mind that doesn't settle easily because it wants something real, not just something familiar. Belonging, in the deepest sense, isn't about finding the perfect room where you finally fit. It's about carrying yourself in a way that feels honest, wherever you go. It's about being less concerned with matching the environment, and more connected to your own internal ground. And once you start belonging to yourself, even a little, the world stops feeling like a place you're visiting. It starts feeling like something you're participating in. So if you've always felt slightly out of place everywhere you go, maybe that's not a sign that you don't belong in the world. Maybe it's a sign that you're still learning how to belong inside your own mind. And honestly, that might be the most meaningful kind of belonging there is. If this resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on when you first started feeling this way. You might be surprised how far back the story goes. And if you want to keep exploring these kinds of psychological patterns together, you already know what to do. Just stay here, stay curious, and keep learning how your mind actually works.